I'm going to be talking to you about empathy mapping. I am actually in the SEO department here at Oban, and empathy mapping is not specifically SEO. It's something that can be applied to lots of different areas of the business, but I'll get into that a little bit more as we go through the presentation. So this is the agenda for today. So I'll run through the basics of what is empathy mapping, why should you do it, examples so you can kind of see what it looks like in case some of you don't know what empathy mapping is, who can join an empathy mapping session and how to run one by yourself. So let's start off with what is empathy mapping. So empathy mapping, before I actually get into it, is it was originally a UX kind of workshop that was developed by people who worked in UX and CRO and design. It was basically a workshop so that they could understand how customers reacted to the website and what they wanted from different parts of the website. And this was something that I learned in a previous agency. And as I was in this workshop to help one of the designers, I realized that actually the basis or the skeleton of this workshop could actually be applied to other parts of marketing as well, including SEO and things like marketing and actually like building on personas. So that's kind of the background history of what empathy mapping kind of is and where I kind of learned about it. Just so you know, it's not the same thing as a focus group, by the way. So empathy mapping doesn't normally get the customer involved in this. So empathy mapping is normally done by people who work for the client. It's never really a group of customers looking at a product. So just so you know, it's not the same thing as a focus group. So yeah, I've kind of explained a little bit about what it is and what it's not. This is just a quick breakdown for you to kind of see. It's normally done by people who work in-house or within agencies to get a better understanding of a set of customers. So before you actually do any empathy mapping, you need to actually have some personas in place already. Luckily, most businesses tend to have those. So if you've never seen one of those, I'll show you an example of what a persona is. Sometimes they're called kind of customer demographics. Either way, it's kind of the same thing. So here we go. So this is an example of a persona or a customer demographic that I made for a fake client. So this is a persona for a luxury perfume client. It's kind of got the basic information, and this is normally put together by a marketing team in-house or a research team in-house, either in the agency or client side, and it's normally gathered data from different sources. So their own internal systems about how their customers are, things from Google Analytics, and so on. So this is normally a template kind of idea of what one customer is for a brand. So this is a persona. So what's empathy mapping? So this is an empathy map. This is what a blank template looks like. I know it's really, really basic, but this is kind of what the original map looks like, or the one that I kind of learned from. What you then do when you have a persona that you want to map is you place kind of a persona on there. You don't have to put a photo. Sometimes you can just write what the persona is or what the name of the persona is, so you have an idea of who you're mapping to. And within that map, there are, as you can see, different sections that you need to fill out. So this is kind of the basic, the ones that everyone kind of follows in general. I have seen different variations, but in general, this is kind of what the different sections mean. So the first section I'm going to talk about is the C section. So this is, so you've put your persona onto the map. This is the person you want to kind of build more information on. You want to learn more about this customer. And you can normally do this for, let's say, if a client or an agency has asked you for information about customers within your market and they don't know anything about it and they're relying on your expertise, you can actually do this to get a better understanding of their different personas and help them build on those on that customer base. So let's get back to the section. So C is the environment of the customer. So where is the customer seeing the brand? Do they see it on social media? Do they see it on magazines, kind of online? You know, this is where you really go into detail about exactly where the customer is, or where are the most popular places that the customer would see. And obviously, if your markets have very specific magazines that we don't have, say, in England or anywhere else, this is where you put that in, because that's useful information. So this is where anywhere that the customer will see the brand at all, and that could include things like advertising by the side of the bus, etc. So say and do. So this is kind of what the customer says and does in public. How do they kind of represent the brand in public, or how do they act when they're kind of wearing that brand, or they're using that brand, or they're kind of like representing that brand? How do they kind of appear in the public? I know this is an odd one, but it really does help with kind of brand perception, and kind of you can help put this information together for the client. And if the client think that actually our customers are very smart and very sophisticated, but if you actually do the mapping and discover that actually people who kind of really like this brand, and when they kind of, you know, wear or use this brand in their day-to-day lives, they're actually slightly more casual and more fun, it can actually provide some insight for the client as well. So there's that. Here, so the section is kind of where does the customer hear about the brand? Obviously things like TV and YouTube, but it can also include things like, do they, you know, do they hear a lot about it from friends? Do they hear about it from family? I know some markets word of mouth is incredibly popular and is actually a really big converter. So this is the kind of place to put that in. I know some people only, let's say they prefer to hear financial advice from people at work rather than friends. It's things like that. So this is an important section to help your client kind of understand where the customer is hearing about their brand and who from. Think and feel. So this is kind of what really matters to the customer. What is the customer looking for the brand to kind of fix? You know, what are their kind of worries? So in terms of, you know, if for example your client is a supplement brand and you want to promote health, one of the worries that the persona you might be mapping to is, you know, they're worried about their joints, or they're worried about their health, and this is kind of that section where you write that in there, so you can kind of tell the client that you're working for that actually you sell this supplement, but the client's actually wanting to feel like that they're healthier or this and that, and it kind of gives them a little bit of gives them some perspective. So lastly, at the bottom, we've got pains and gains. This section is really important, so don't forget it if you ever come to do mapping yourself. So pains is obviously, what is this particular customer? What are their frustrations and their obstacles? What do they need the brand to help them with, for example? So this is really important for when the client comes to create content that answers the user's questions. So you should really dig into kind of what do they need the brand to do. So for example, if you're selling, if the client is selling mattresses, then one of the potential frustrations or pains of a particular customer is they find it very difficult to get to sleep. They're insomniacs. So this is the section where you write that in. So what can the brand help the customer to fix? And on the other section, we've got gains, which is what does the customer kind of want in terms of what do they need the brand to help them feel or to achieve. So for example, if, like I said earlier, if we're looking to help a client who's a fitness client, this is the section where you'd write the customer wants to feel stronger. So you kind of write that in this section, so that when the client comes to write content, they need to focus on things like, okay, we need to write content that makes a client, like how can we help them feel stronger? What can we do to help them improve? So this is the section where you write that in. So this is an example that I filled in. So using the persona that we're using at the moment, so this is for a fake luxury fragrance brand. I filled this in for you so you can kind of see what this looks like. So we've got obviously Instagram, we've got some magazines that are very popular in the UK for the age group that we're trying to map to, and obviously we've got some pain points and things like that. So this is kind of how you fill in the map. This is a very, very cleaned up version. If you come to do mapping yourself, don't worry if there's a lot in the section. To be honest with you, the more the better. I've just done a very clean version so you can kind of see what a filled in empathy map looks like. So here we go. So this is kind of what I mentioned earlier, how empathy mapping doesn't have to look the same. I think I stick with the original template because it's easier, but here are some examples that other people have done that don't follow that like format at all. So some people actually write the comments of the sections in sticky notes and stick it onto a whiteboard instead. You can actually do it on a whiteboard, which is what the one on the bottom right hand side is with the head that says Ralph there, and the one above it is actually one that someone's done in a kind of a digital editing suite to make it look more professional and more clean. And as you can see, it doesn't follow the same format at all. So it doesn't really matter which way you want to do it. I know some clients and some customers, some clients and agencies have their own format, but if you're being asked to kind of help them build on their personas and their customer base, just ask them if they have a template, because that will make it a lot easier. If they don't, I would probably just recommend sticking with the original that I showed you earlier. So as you can kind of guess, empathy maps are for every language. They're not unique to just the English language. You can do this for anyone in the world, basically, regardless of the language, so long as you have a brand that you're going to map to and personas for that brand. It can work for anyone. So here are some international examples. I'm sure we've got some people who probably understand those languages. There's one in the bottom right hand corner which is Thai, and that's where I'm from. So you really can do empathy mapping for any person or any consumer anywhere in the world, so long as you have a brand and a persona to map to. So why should we even do empathy mapping? What's the actual point? If you've got a persona, it should be enough, right? No, not really. So personas are great, but they are, as I said earlier, they're bits of information from lots of different sources, and it's actually a very surface level understanding of a customer. What empathy mapping does is it kind of helps you dig in a little bit into that person and find out, okay, the woman that you're mapping to is called Jane, and she's 30 and she likes chocolate and wine. That doesn't give you enough information to create good quality content. And what empathy mapping does, it actually tells you what Jane needs from your brand, what she really fears, why she kind of likes the brand, who she heard the brand from. It kind of builds on that and gives better value and more quality to that persona. So yeah, these are just some examples of why you should do empathy mapping. I have actually done all of these, and it actually gives you a lot of value. So you build up on your personas. You can end up diversifying your content types as well, which is a nice thing to help your clients achieve. So if your clients are only making blog posts, but it turns out that when you did a persona map, one of your personas spends most of their time watching video, then they're not going to see that blog post. And if the client isn't making any video, then they're not fully kind of reaching that particular persona or that audience. So it kind of gives you more ammunition to go back to your client and kind of tell them, okay, you've got 4 personas, these 2 like this two like this person likes this, and it kind of helps them expand on what they need to produce in order to reach as many people as possible. So who can join an empathy mapping session? So anyone, basically. You can do this if you're in-house, you can do this if you're an agency. Kind of what I want to do in the future is invite the client to come in and actually do them with us. So we're not doing them without the client, we're actually getting the client's perspective as well. If you can find people who are interested in the things you're trying to map to and the client and what they sell, even better. So we've kind of talked about who can join and what it is. So how do you actually run one? It's really not that difficult. You need a facilitator. So this is the main person who runs the session, and they basically help to prompt other people if things are getting a bit slow or if no ideas are kind of coming out. This is the kind of person who keeps energy levels high, and this is the person who will have to do a lot of research beforehand. So they'll have to know all the personas, they'll have to know exactly what the client says, who the client competitors are, and kind of any other additional reading that may need to be done for this session. You'll also need a timekeeper. It's basically just someone who takes notes and keeps track of time so that things don't run over, and that when ideas are kind of shared, they're done in a set amount of time, so you're not just dragging it out, basically. And then finally, you'll need participants. So to be honest with you, even in an agency and in-house, I only have 9 people maximum, because you don't need that many. Too many, and it just starts diluting the value of the workshop, whereas the 9 is kind of the magic number I found. They'll be the people who will provide the bulk of the ideas and kind of help you fill in the sections of the map. So that's who you will need. So what you'll need to prepare, so like I keep saying, you need personas to map to. So you can't map on a persona that you don't have. It's very, very difficult. So make sure that when the client says, look, I really need you to help me understand the German market. We don't really understand our German customers and who they are. Can you please help us kind of get a better understanding? It will look really good if you email back and say, absolutely, do you have any personas I can work from? And chances are they should have them. If they don't, it's a little bit trickier, but not the end of the world. So it's a good thing to ask before you start. Obviously, make sure you read the personas and exactly who they are, how old they are, what they buy on the website, what they like, just so you have an idea. And like I said earlier, any sources of information that the persona is interested in. So this will help if you have a group of participants who don't know anything about the product or the client, and if you're trying to get them to help you and they get stuck, you can say, oh, there's a magazine that helps with this, or there's a website that talks about this, and then it kind of helps to jog and trigger them to come up with more ideas. Again, make sure you have enough personas to map to. Make sure you've got the right amount of personas for the right amount of people or the right amount of groups. If you're getting someone to be a timekeeper, just have a meeting with them beforehand to run things through. Talk about what you're going to do, in what order, how long things are going to be. Just have that meeting so you're both clear, and just make sure you have all the materials that you need. Empathy mapping isn't expensive and it's not difficult. In fact, you could probably do it with a sheet of paper and a pen. Like, that's literally a sheet of paper and a pen and a timer of some sort, probably on your smartphone. So that's literally all you need, really. But yeah, if you want to do it on a whiteboard with markers, or you want to do it with sticky notes, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure you have all that equipment before you start. So again, so how to run a session. So part one, empathy mapping is split into two parts. So you've got the first part, which is mapping, and that's normally 10 minutes per map. So see what I mean, how you have to keep time to make sure that you don't run over. Timing it kind of ensures that people come up with ideas in the space of time. It kind of puts a sense of urgency in it, and it kind of makes people reactive and makes them think faster, hence why 10 minutes is normally about enough. Like I said, if you've got a big group, you can follow this, but if you've only got a small group, this may have to be tweaked a little bit. Basically, make sure that if you've got a big group, that they work on one map at a time, and then 10 minutes, and then they rotate to a different map. But if you've only got a small group of you, say you and 2 other people, you probably won't need to do this. Just time yourself, and when 10 minutes is over, just change to a different map if you have another map to map to, funnily enough. So once you've done with that, part 2 is the ideation stage. So what I normally do, so part 1, you've done that, you've done 10 minutes per map. So if you're only doing one empathy map, that's basically 10 minutes, absolutely fine. Have a little break, maybe get something to eat just so people can refresh themselves, and start on with part 2. So part 2 is ideation, and this is where the real kind of ideas come from. This is where the value kind of comes from, really. So this is 20 minutes per map now. So if you've only got one map, obviously go back to the same map. And basically, if you have different groups, this is where you bring everyone together. But if you've got a small group, again, you don't need to do that because everyone's already there. And this is basically where you build on those ideas. So round 1 was basically filling in as much as possible very quickly. Round 2 is basically going back to those sections and seeing if you can actually build on those ideas. So let's say round 1, in the C section, someone said fitness magazines, and then you moved on. Part 2 of this is, okay, you've gone back, C section, you've seen that you've put in fitness magazines. This is where you put in the specific names of the fitness magazines. So if it's, say, a 30-year-old woman, she may not, for example, be reading something like Muscle Mania. She may read something like Women's Fitness instead. But you see what I mean? Both of those are categorized in fitness magazines. But until you get onto part 2 and you build on that, you don't get that value. You're not quite sure what type of fitness magazine. The client might not know. So this is where you go back and kind of really dig down and specify specifically, this is what we mean, this is where you can find it, this is the URL, etc., and so on. So this is where you really go into granular detail. So at this point as well, there are no bad ideas. So if you come up with something and you think actually someone would really like an app for this fitness thing would be amazing, I think that'll be really popular, write it down on there. Even if the client turns around and says, oh, you know, that's a really good idea, but we haven't got the budget, at least you've written it down, because they may come and do it later on, or they may be actually think, oh, we didn't actually think of that, that's a really good idea. So even if you think it's a really big and expensive idea and the client might not go for it, write it down anyway, because they may do in the future. You genuinely never know. So lastly, there are small things not to forget. Make sure you split people into balanced teams. Again, that's if you have a big group. Ban from checking emails. So the reason why everything's timed is you want to get the most value as possible from all the ideas, hence why everything else for 10-20 minutes is kind of off the cards, if at all possible. Like I said, give people a break, especially if you're doing a lot of maps, just because people can run out of steam very quickly, so it just makes sense. If you don't have time for a break and you want to do the mapping very quickly, like I said, just bring in some food or some drinks into the session with you, because people will need that kind of refresh and that sustenance. So after the session, so let's say you've mapped a persona, you had a really good session, you've got a nice big bit of paper with lovely ideas on, and all the sections are filled out. What do you then do with that? Where does that go? So what then happens is the facilitator, if it's on a piece of paper, they collect those pieces of paper, obviously to transfer onto, say, a workflow sheet or an Excel document of ideas later on. I would recommend that if you do a mapping session on a whiteboard, that you take a photo of it, because I've had experiences where we've done like an hour of mapping and then the sheet got thrown away by accident, and all that hard work just completely went into the bin, literally, and we couldn't find it again. So learn from my mistakes, take a photo so you have it just in case. Again, once you have that photo and you have the actual sheet of paper, that then gets put into some sort of workflow sheet, because obviously you can send a photo to the client or to the agency that you're doing this for, but they're just going to look at it and just be like, why haven't you done this in a more usable format? So to be really helpful, what I used to do is take that in, and for each different section of the map, I would do a tab in like an Excel or a Google sheet and just write all the ideas in there. Obviously, columns for each section, and just make it really clear, and that's then something that's shared with the agency or the client, and it's a lot more clearer, and that way they can actually filter through and decide what they're going to do and what they're going to work on. I have seen people who have put kind of empathy mapping ideas onto things like Trello boards, which are free. So make sure you check with the client or the agency once you do this, kind of what format that they prefer it in, just to double check, because they may turn around and be like, oh, it'd be really good if you could just put this straight into Trello, or can you put this into an Excel for us? Just double check that. If the agency or the client who are asking your help kind of want you to help them kind of build on their customer base and understand their customers a bit more, and you actually think, you know what, empathy mapping would be really helpful for this, make sure you actually tell them that. I mean, it's not going to affect them whatsoever. They may ask you what empathy mapping is, and hopefully you can tell them now. But make sure you tell them that, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look through the website, and I'm also going to do a little bit of a workshop here to build on those personas, and at the end of it, you'll get a Word document with my research and an Excel sheet with all the content ideas, all the pieces of data from that map that you can use however you so choose. So just kind of communicate to that, just so they know, because I know they're not really long sessions, empathy mapping. It can be actually quite quick depending on how many ideas you get, but I kind of feel like telling them that actually makes you sound better, and actually kind of opens up that transparency conversation where they know exactly what you're doing, how you're going to be doing it, and the format that they're going to be getting in the end. So yeah, that's the end of kind of the basics of empathy mapping. It's really not difficult, and I'm sure there's some more reading online. There are different ways that you can do it, like I said, but I feel like I've probably told you the basics, so you should relatively feel comfortable. You probably relatively feel comfortable in doing it yourself. But like I said, it may need to be tweaked depending on how many people you have. But otherwise, it's a really good tool to kind of help clients build up on their customer personas, because again, like I said, most of them don't offer that much information, not really. And if you kind of turn around to a client and say, this is what I can actually do to help you build on those, it's a potential extra win for you, and it's helpful for the client or the agency as well. So it's basically a win-win.